Mr. President, I rise today along with many of my colleagues to speak about the critically important legislation before the Senate, the bill to reform Wall Street and end the excesses that have sent our economy into a tailspin. Having made the tough choice to fend off a collapse of our economic system, we must now look back and decide what actions are required to hold Wall Street accountable and put consumers back in control of their finances. This Congress has taken decisive action to stem the bleeding, actions that were not always comfortable but were necessary, and our economy is starting to heal. And yet we remain at a seminal moment in our history. 1/10 of our population remains unemployed. The threat of foreclosure haunts far too many families, and American seniors are scrambling to replenish what they once considered their retirement accounts. The fault, Mr. President, for this economic decline, however, does not lie at the feet of the working class nor reflect the steady strength of American ingenuity. Instead, the Wall Street bailout and the threat of global economic depression that necessitated it was thrust upon us by those who put short-term self-interest above the economic security of our nation. It's an unpleasant fact to admit, but the current financial system all too often rewards greed and recklessness, fans speculative trading, and has fostered shady dealings that are so complicated that only those Wall Street firms that stand to benefit can comprehend them. Compounding this, consumers have often found themselves on the losing end of these deals. Wall Street executives have taken excessive risks, knowing a sweetheart contract, a bonus, or a stock option will cover their losses, while stockholders are left empty-handed. Nearly a quarter of Americans have found themselves with home mortgages they struggle to afford, while the lender's commission has long been spent. And Mr. President, American consumers have to jump through hoop after hoop and ultimately pay to have access to their own credit score, while bankers and lenders can easily obtain this information to hike their annual interest rate or monthly payment. Mr. President, don't get me wrong. I'm the first to recognize that our financial sector historically has played a driving role in the growth of our economy. In many instances, Wall Street's ingenuity has spurred solid investment and helped U.S. businesses compete worldwide. But we can't ignore the plain fact that transparent investing and fair business dealings seem to be the exception these days rather than the rule. In one recent example, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission alleged that Goldman Sachs realized that the only way out of bad securities was to sell them to unwitting investors. And this investigation, unfortunately, is rapidly expanding to other financial firms and products and is symptomatic of how out of touch Wall Street has become with the American workers, who are the real engine of our economy. The 2008 collapse washed away nearly half of Americans' savings and investments, and then those same taxpayers were on the hook to finance Wall Street's rescue. And I got to tell you, Mr. President, I understand the anger of Coloradans and Americans all around the country, many of you who felt that the big banks should have been left to fail. So in that context, Mr. President, our constituents have asked us, please reform the current laws so that this does not happen again. Please hold Wall Street to the same rules that hardworking families and small businesses are held to. But now as the economy recovers, slowly adding jobs and allowing families to rebuild their savings and retirement portfolios, Wall Street is reporting record profits and its executives are again pocketing record bonuses. It's time to put American consumers back in control of their financial future. We must hold Wall Street accountable and create a financial system that works for all Americans, not just rich executives. The legislation that we're trying to bring up for debate this week does just that. With Senator Dodd's leadership, he's here on the floor. The Wall Street Accountability Act will safely regulate the shadow markets and the hidden side bet financing that escaped the regulatory radar and allowed financial firms to engage in risky and irresponsible behavior that wiped out trillions in family savings. Senator Dodd's bill will hold big banks and financial institutions accountable for the bad decisions they make and make them plan ahead to deal with their losses to ensure that taxpayers are never never, never again responsible for bailing out a financial firm that is designated as too big to fail, such as AIG. The bill, as my colleague from Rhode Island talked about, will also hold Wall Street accountable by giving consumer shareholders new power to prevent excessive bonuses that reward executive failures while average Americans are left holding the bag. The bill will also complement the credit card bill that I introduced in the House of Representatives several years ago and legislation under Senator Dodd's leadership that Congress passed last year. The bill forced big banks and credit card companies to provide clear and understandable information to consumers. And this bill will also hold the non-bank lending industry the same sort of standards that traditional bankers in their industry are required to follow. Finally, this bill will start to change the culture of Wall Street by instilling new transparency and accountability rules to ensure that complicated financial derivative transactions take place in an open marketplace. In short and in sum, this legislation provides what our friends, our neighbors, our family members for years have been demanding: a system that's designed for them, rewards hard work, and is grounded in the kind of business integrity that Americans every day certify with a handshake. Americans will be back in control of their financial well-being. That is why, in addition to the reforms that we will be discussing this week, I introduced legislation last week with bipartisan support to put everyday Americans back in charge of their finances by giving them free access to their credit score. And I want to just take a moment and thank Senators Lugar, Menendez, Lieberman, Levin, Hagan, Shaheen, Klobuchar, Tom Udall, and Scott Brown for joining me in putting consumers first by co-sponsoring this common sense legislation, which also has the support of a wide range of consumer groups. Today, as we look back on the mistakes of the past and the imbalances that still disadvantage consumers, Americans deserve a Congress on their side. Yet, some here appear to still support a risky system where Wall Street can act with impunity and get bailed out when things go bad. They want to protect speculators at the expense of consumer protections and shield financial institutions from rules that would avert taxpayer-financed bailouts. I'm here to say, as many of my other colleagues have tonight, that those days are over. It's time to hold Wall Street accountable, and we cannot let the status quo continue to persist. I see the chairman of the Banking Committee, Senator Dodd, is here, and I was reminded just a few blocks from here, just outside the Federal Trade Commission, stands a pair of statues, each depicting a heroic figure straining to control a powerful horse. And they were erected under the Roosevelt administration as an emblem to Americans from all walks of life that fair business practices would serve to further the common good of all of us as Americans. Well, I have news. Under our current system, the reins have been released when it comes to Wall Street. And now, some 70 years later, here we are at a similar point in our history. And we must stand together as we did then, as a nation committed to sound investing, transparent business dealings, and an economic system that puts consumer first. Mr. President, this debate's about choices, and the American people have a clear choice. There are a lot of us here that want to get to work. We wanted to get to work today. But the vote that we took tonight also showed that some in this institution are willing to filibuster and delay to prevent the Senate from even debating Wall Street reforms. It's clear to me and clear to Coloradans that a vote against even having this debate is a vote to protect Wall Street at the expense of hardworking Americans. Too much is at stake to let this delay persist. I want to close with something that President Roosevelt said in 1932. Never in history, he said, have the interests of all the people been so united in a single economic problem. Once again, as we did 70 years ago, let us get to work, put together protections against the Wall Street excesses that threaten our long-term economic stability.